I've clicked onto the Global Tropical already for September the 6th, 2023. As is always the case in these videos, the thoughts expressed are mine alone, and when making decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look toward the local weather office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. We have two systems that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about Hurricane Jova and Tropical Storm Lee in the Atlantic. But we're going to quickly just first mention Jova, get it out of the way. I'll leave timestamps, so if you don't want to hear about Jova, if you want to just jump straight to Lee, I'll leave timestamps there. And I'll also leave some extra timestamps for Lee for going over intensity and track, as this system is certainly something to watch track-wise from the Caribbean up towards the United States East Coast, all the way up into Atlantic Canada. Well, let's focus right now on Hurricane Jova, and I hope I'm saying that correctly. If not, I apologize. But this is an amazing hurricane. This has been rapidly intensifying over the night hours, and you can see this is just a classic bombing out hurricane that you would get in peak season here in the Northern Hemisphere. You've got this massive curved band structure, this massive feeder band feeding right into the CDO, or the central dense overcast. That's this ring of very strong thunderstorms surrounding the eye, which the eye is not too large. I don't know the exact size, but that's not a very large eye overall. We are seeing that eye try to warm. In fact, if I reload this loop, you might even see a little more warming. We're seeing a little bit more, and I wouldn't be surprised, in the next, 6 hours to become a major hurricane. This could be a major hurricane right now, and later tonight, early tomorrow morning, we may be seeing a peak as a powerful Category 4 hurricane. We may be looking at a top end here for Cat 4. Now, the good news is the system is staying out to sea, and this is not going to be bringing any land impacts to Mexico. This is a type of storm any weather enthusiast or meteorologist loves to see. It's a storm that's really nice to look at, really nice to see how the structure evolves, and it doesn't impact land. Here's a microwave pass we got not too long ago. This was a couple hours ago. And you can see the well-defined inner core structure finishing up there. It looks like it was a little bit open on the northern side, but it's closing that off by now. And I'd imagine by now that if we got a new microwave pass right now, that eye will be complete. And you can also see this massive feeder band here. Now, this system is likely to peak within the next day or two, as it will be soon encountering lower sea surface temperatures. You can see as we go through the next 2 days, expecting a 140 mile per hour peak, 145 mile per hour peak, sorry, from the National Hurricane Center. And you can see that general weakening trend, quick weakening at that, as it gets into much cooler sea surface temperatures towards the latter part of this week. And I'm going to be showing this cone as well, this type of cone for Lee, as is a very good format made by Tomer Berg, I believe it is, on his website. Very good data here with the NHC forecast cone coupled with the sea surface temperatures. It gives you a good perspective on where the storm is tracking in relative to the sea surface temperatures. But that is Jova. Now we're going to move on to Tropical Storm Lee. And let me get a visible loop here for Lee, as it is sunrise now. And you can see this system is having sort of the look as well that this system is about to start getting itself more organized and maybe getting itself towards hurricane intensity. In fact, it's already near there. It's about 70 miles per hour right now, estimated by the National Hurricane Center. And that will likely become a hurricane later today pretty quickly. This may be, I think it is a little bit ahead of schedule here. And given the increasing environment for Lee, there is extremely high confidence here that we are going to have a monster of hurricane, intensity-wise, that is. Now, the good news is the current ensemble guidance is in pretty good agreement that this system is going to pass north of the Leeward and Virgin Islands, but we're still likely going to see some form of impacts, whether that's mainly just surf or rip current issues, or if it tracks maybe a little bit farther south on the cone and maybe brings some heavier rainfall to the area. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But if you look at the visible satellite loop, you can see a similar curved band structure that I just pointed out with Jova, you can see this large curved band wrapping into the center of circulation. The center looks to be maybe about there. And we have seen today, this morning, with some microwave passes, that this eye, or this inner core, is trying to develop into an eye. And you can see that here based on this pass. This was a little bit earlier than the Jova pass, about an hour and a half earlier. And you can see it's certainly not well defined at this point, but it's certainly on its way. And given enough time, and given the fact that the sea surface temperatures are increasing and the shear is decreasing, things are going to be looking pretty good for this. Now, it has been dealing with some shear over the past day. If we look at the water vapor loop, you can still see some flow here. It might be difficult to see, but there is some flow here that you can see out of the east or northeast coming towards Lee, and you can see some of this drier air here. This has been causing some issues for the storm, but it hasn't really been inhibiting it, obviously, just given the current look. And we had a very well-defined shrimp pattern, or curved band pattern, rather, in the tropical Atlantic yesterday. Now, notice as well, we still have the shear, of course, but notice the outflow expanding north and northwest of the storm. This is as the upper level ridge that has been shearing the system. It is still bringing, again, some shear, but it's now getting into a more well-oriented position for Lee, and I can show you that here on the GFS 200 millibar flow. I kind of spoiled the ending there, but if I even zoom into the tropical Atlantic region, you can see here is the ridge up aloft, and you can see if I go back, this was a little displaced yesterday, and it's why we had some of that northeasterly or easterly flow impinging upon the storm. Now, this ridge is going to continue today to be more aligned with the system, and this is by tonight or early tomorrow morning, you can see the flow of the ridge is now parallel with the steering flow in the low levels. And we don't really have, very strong winds relative to the surface aloft, so this is going to make for a pretty low shear environment. Alongside that, moisture is going to increase as it heads northwest. It is dealing, again, with some dry air. You could see that in the water vapor loop. This is some Saharan air that has been around in the MDR. This is going to move away from that, and it's going to have a moisture pocket pretty well defined at that. And given the shear lowering, and I can show you this as we go in time, I'm going to go out to 5 days on this part. You can just see that upper level anticyclone staying over the storm, and we see very significant intensification. In fact, the National Hurricane Center specified explosive intensification on the GFS and the European models, and that makes sense. These models are really wanting to bomb this system out. It's not only those models as well. We're seeing hurricane models such as the HWRF and the HAFS models really bomb this system out. And given the environment that we have and the warm sea surface temperatures, I can see why. And it makes sense entirely why the National Hurricane Center is going so aggressive on their forecast. As you can see, this is 5 days. We've still got a very impressive upper level pattern here. This is probably one of the most impressive upper level patterns I've seen in the Atlantic. Thinking back, maybe Sam of 2021. If before then, it may be Hurricane Dorian of 2019 that had a fairly similar pattern to this in the upper levels. Now, of course, I'm not comparing this storm to any way to Dorian. This is not going to be Dorian. But in terms of upper level patterns with this upper level anticyclone, which is very favorable for these systems, that I haven't seen, something this favorable in a while, and it's been a bit. And it's not often that you get storms like this in the Atlantic, that you have this amount of confidence that they're going to bomb out like this. I looked at some historical records for the National Hurricane Center, and with their forecast yesterday, they had initialized the first forecasting, I believe, 140 miles per hour, and that was the highest ever first forecast that they've ever made in, I believe, both the Atlantic and the East Pacific. So that should give you some sense of the rarity of this. But alongside that, with the latest forecast of 150 miles per hour by day 3, that in of itself is a record high. The National Hurricane Center has never forecasted, at least in the Atlantic, is a system that's currently a 70-mile-per-hour tropical storm to be at 150 miles per hour by the 3-day point in their forecast. It has not been done before in the Atlantic. So that should give you a sense of how favorable this environment is and how confident we are that we're going to have a significant hurricane here. And I'm going to be honest, I would not be surprised if this system makes it all the way to Category 5 intensity. This is probably one of the better chances, probably one of the best chances we've had in recent memory in the Atlantic of a system reaching that Category 5 threshold. But I mean, if it peaks at 150 or 160, it's a beast either way. Now, here's a European model, 200 millibar flow at the same time. This is at day 5. You can see once again that very favorable upper level pattern. Now, in terms of track towards the Caribbean islands and the Leeward Islands and the Virgin Islands, the general pattern has been shifting over the past several days naturally, but we've started to get, especially yesterday and today, into more of an agreement between most models on that this system is probably going to stay well north of the islands, mainly because we have this subtropical ridge up north, and this is going to generally direct the storm northwestwards. Now, we have seen, particularly in Europeans' case, we've seen the ridge be a little bit stronger here, and that does lead the storm to, on some ensemble plots, getting a little closer to the islands, but none of those ensembles are really showing, and I'll show you the super ensemble plot later from the same website that I got the forecast cones, which will show GFS, Canadian, and European ensembles. You'll see that none of those, even diverging south, really make landfall or really get the eye close to those islands. We're pretty high confident the system is not going to make direct landfall there. But does not mean that you're not going to get away without impacts. And I can show you the National Hurricane Center forecast cone now, coupled with the seasonal temperatures as well. And you can see that this forecast cone, it is, the center track is pretty far north of the islands, and that's good news. But keep in mind, if you're here in Puerto Rico, the Leeward Islands, the Virgin Islands, if the system does deviate south, remember this forecast cone is, for the track uncertainty of the center of the storm. If it does deviate a little bit south, impacts could be more significant than if it were to take this center track. And the National Hurricane Center do continuously mention this in their discussion that while the cone is good, it's not showing a direct impact entirely. It's important to remember the error at 4 and 5 days out is pretty big. You can see here, this is a pretty wide margin of error here by day 4 and day 5. And a deviation south can easily get the storm's impacts closer to the island, especially because the system is not going to be, one little dot. It's going to be a pretty expansive system, and we may still see some significant impacts here in the northern Caribbean islands as the system passes north. Now, I know a lot of the questions after this is probably going to be, what is going to happen after it passes north of the Caribbean islands? Where is it going to go? Is it going to come towards Bermuda? Is it going to hit the United States? Is it going to hit the Bahamas or Turks and Caicos? Now, there's a lot of uncertainty naturally. That's just one disclaimer I should put out there. This is a long-range forecast, and there is a lot of details that need to be fine-tuned before we can exactly tell you what this system is going to do after the time. What we can tell you is that the system does bear monitoring, especially in, I'd say, the eastern United States, Bermuda, and Atlantic Canada. Now, this is the GFS ensemble plot of the 500 millibar flow, and this is at day 5, and I'm going to carry you out to 7 days out. So here we are. This is day 7. First of all, note the widespread in possible positions for Lee at this time. The storm could be anywhere within this blue circle. So it could be here southeast of Bermuda. It could be here just east of the Bahamas. That's one important thing to point out. But look at the upper level pattern north of the system. We have this trough digging in over the eastern United States, and we have this ridge here east of Bermuda. Now, in a typical case, if you have high confidence in these two features staying intact and not evolving in separate ways, this would be a track generally northward. And that is exactly what the models right now do depict. In fact, pretty much every ensemble member that you will see from these models do turn this system north at some point. The uncertainty, though, comes after 7 days. There is uncertainty on exactly how this trough will evolve. There is uncertainty on exactly how this ridge will evolve. And these two features do dictate each other. And I'm going to show you the European for this. This is the operational run from last night. And this is just one possible scenario here. And what you'll see is we get towards 7 days, we have the same general pattern that we saw in the GFS ensembles. You have this ridge here near Bermuda, and we have this trough digging in here over the eastern United States. The difference here is, though, this trough evolves a little bit differently on the European than on other models. Compared to, say, the GFS ensemble mean, rather than having this big, deep trough here over the eastern United States, you still get, of course, the big trough, but you'll notice that this part of this trough, the northern part, leaves the scene pretty quickly. And this southern part does cut off into the south into a cutoff low. And with this northern part leaving the scene quickly, and I'll play this out here, go to the end of the run, you can see this trough has split. We have this part going into northeastern Canada, and we have a southern part splitting off into a cutoff shortwave or upper level low here across the southern United States. What this does is it allows room for this ridge to build potentially further northwest. And this could open the potential for the system to come maybe a little bit farther west, maybe closer to the United States. Now, of course, keep in mind, this is Friday, September the 15th. It is September the 6th. This is 9 days out. So there's a lot of things that can change here, and this is one solution. The European has had solutions to where we have a big trough in the eastern United States, and we get a system tracking closer to Bermuda and then into Atlantic Canada. And I'll show you the GFS ensemble approach, and you can see the trough and ridge generally pulls it north, but you can still see as well, we still get generally something close on some of these runs to the northeastern United States. But even if it doesn't come to the northeastern United States, and it takes a track further out to sea, we'd still be looking at impacts to Bermuda and certainly to Atlantic Canada. We've seen a lot of ensembles and models depicting potential for some form of impacts to Atlantic Canada. Now, of course, right now, like I said, this is 9 to 10 days out, even in terms of Atlantic Canada impacts, 10 days plus. So there's a lot of uncertainty here, and that's really the main thing to drive home. I know you may see a lot of these plots online on Twitter and Facebook and on YouTube, and the important thing to realize is that this is an inexact science. We're trying to predict something that has a lot of uncertainty right now, past 7 days. We cannot accurately forecast these things past 7 days. Technology is just not that good, and I don't know if it'll ever get that good, just with how sensitive some of these patterns can be. Now, here's the super ensemble plots that I told you I would show you. This is first out to 5 days. This is all the ensembles. This is the European, the GFS. In fact, it even has a UK Met and the CMC. And you can see this wide spread here of solutions. This is why I told you on the forecast cone that's a track cone and it could potentially deviate south. You can see that we do have a lot of members here showing the potential for a potential track closer to the Leeward Islands. But of course, notice we're not expecting a landfall here. And that has really been, I'd say, honed down. I'd say the chances of an exact landfall probably pretty low at this point in the Leeward Islands. Now let's go out to 7 days, and I'm going to turn on what's called the ellipse here. And this is going to paint a picture pretty well of how wide the spread is. And you can see there is a massive spread here. We have a spread from Cuba to well southeast of Bermuda. And if I go even further out, this is Thursday, September the 14th. I almost said August the 14th, but it's September the 14th. And you can see the ellipse gets larger with so much uncertainty here. But you can see this general track northwards. So we're pretty sure that at some point it's going to turn north, just given the pattern. The uncertainty, like I said, is just exactly how do these features evolve? How does this trough evolve? How does this ridge evolve? These are questions we can't answer. And the most important thing is, to drive home this week is we have time, of course. This is 7 days before it even gets into the realm of possibility of talking about impacts to the U.S., Bermuda, and Atlantic Canada. So if you're in these areas, just have your hurricane preparedness kit ready. It's peak of hurricane season. You should already have it in place, but just in case you don't, make sure you get it in place. This is your week to do it. And if you do have it in place, make sure you review it. I know we've just had, Adalia and Franklin, so it's a good idea to review it, make sure everything is in check. Of course, nothing is guaranteed here, but it's always better to be safe than sorry. You never want to be unprepared if a hurricane comes through. We'll have further videos this week and throughout this week and into next week on Lee and whatever else the tropics throws at us. And I'll, of course, be bringing you all updates on what the pattern is showing here for Lee in the longer range. But that's it for today's video. Again, Hurricane Jova, rapidly intensifying, going to track out to sea and be no threat to land, may be a powerful Category 4 hurricane, and Lee forecast to be a very powerful hurricane as it tracks generally north of the Leeward Islands. They'll stay tuned to local weather offices and the National Hurricane Center for local information on how to prepare ahead of the storm. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching.